This podcast is brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. I'm your host, Molly Troupe, and today with me is Gian Nelson, the master distiller for the Ruins Distillery and partner at Jano Spirits. Today we're going to talk about all things agave. Did you know that agave is grown in places other than Mexico? More on that in just a bit, but first, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering your team needs at no cost to you. Sid Delaray from Filibuster Distillery says, "From the design and engineering to installation and startup, G&D was easy to work with. We've had great customer service since commissioning our chiller, and I'd highly recommend them for any distillery system. Reach out today for a quote at gdchillers.com. Gian, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to get to speak with you about all things agave.
Hey, Molly, how are we doing?
We're doing great. I'd love to just dive right in and talk about how you got started in the spirits industry.
Absolutely. So I started actually in wine. Before I got into distilling, I was doing wine all through California. I was really interested in just the process of turning a raw material into something else with creativity, science, hard work, you name it. I had a really fun time in wine, but I kind of realized early on that I don't know where I was going to land. And being a pretty competitive industry in California, I just didn't know what was going on. But a friend of mine was starting a distillery here in the Napa Valley. He saw what I can do work-wise, work ethic, and decided that he needed someone like me on his team. I thought it was a really good opportunity for me because it was really a growing industry back in 2016. And plus, to be paid more than I've ever been paid to go live in the Napa Valley was a pretty nice offer. So I took it, moved up here since 2016. Didn't really know anything about distilling when I got in. I was more in the barrel and cellar side just because I had that experience in wine. But then eventually, learned a lot more about distilling as I went. A lot of repetitions, a lot of single malt being made, a lot of gins in that time, and just kind of grew into the role. And so I've been doing this now 8 or 9 years. And then as the last couple of years, I've been really trying to primarily focus on California agave.
I love it. Okay. So you work at both the Ruins Distillery and at Jano Spirits. Let's talk about both of those roles.
At Ruins Distillery, we are primarily a malt whiskey production facility. We also do a gin. We have a 3,200 liter Carl pot column hybrid with an external botanical basket with 8 plates. If I'm going to be technical there, also with a 5,000 liter wash still and a 3,200 liter spirit still with a D flag on it. And so what that setup lets us able to do is just really be diverse in the kind of spirits that we can make. We also have pretty much a full brewery to make single malt. So we have a mash tun, we have hot and cold liquor tanks, the fermenters. We mill the grain on site. We do pretty much everything grain to glass here at the facility. And then we also do a lot of brandy for the wine industry people. If there's excess wine or wine that didn't get into the bottling run, we can turn that into brandy for laying down for aging, or we can turn that into a neutral brandy, throwing it through the gin still for fortification and whatnot. Where you can find us any day, either mashing an American single malt, malted rye, malted wheat, malted bourbon. That's been a pretty exciting one. Making brandy for folks, making gin, and we could pretty much do one, two, or the other, in the same day.
That's awesome. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about Jano Spirits. and what you do there.
Yeah, so with Jano, it's really my passion project. That's developing alongside the California agave scene. I really got inspired with agave spirit because at the time I was doing a lot of contract work for other folks, bottling bourbon that was coming from Indiana, just making other people's gins, making other people's whiskeys. And I really just wanted to see what I could do on my own. And I thought, I've done this for other people. Maybe I can do it myself. And so agave really spoke to me, being Mexican American. We had some experience with like agave syrup, so I figured maybe there was something to do there. And I don't know, in my head, I just thought I'd Google if there are actually agaves grown in California, if there was some sort of supplier. And so that led me to meeting Craig Reynolds in the California Agave Council. I got invited to do a harvest with them one time, and I was just absolutely hooked. I got to meet some incredible people. We were harvesting some Blue Weber agave that were being grown here. And I just really wanted to get into that space. But unfortunately, there weren't enough agaves for me to just get my hands on. So I was basically told to wait in line. But there were these other agaves that no one really wanted to work with because they weren't Blue Weber, Tequilana. They were, these Americanas that didn't have as much sugar, and they're really big, so no one wants to work with them. And I don't know, that challenge just kind of felt really natural for me to take. So I met with Henry Garcia and his family that own the Americanas, and we did a couple harvests with them, and it was a learning process, but we were really proud that we were the first ones to make an agave spirit in California with agave Americana. And that really led to our whole storyline as well of, using U.S. native endemic agaves instead of using Mexican varietals. We were really passionate about the terroir of where those agaves are grown, which is super important to us because of just how many microclimates we have here in California. And then the process as well was very rudimentary, very, I would say, mezcal esque in the way that we are, cooking in earthen pits with wood and lava rocks for 5 to 6 days. Doing native fermentations, doing double pot still distillations, very, very similar in process, but obviously the flavor and the type of agaves are not exactly like a mezcal, especially since we're not in that protected region. But we've been at it now for almost 4 years. We've done a couple batches. They've won awards. We are really just in love with our agave community, the people here in California. And then that's led me to having relationships with people in the tequila industry, mezcal industry, almost working backwards.
This podcast has never talked about tequila or any agave spirits before, so it's kind of a new thing for us. And we were actually, just discussing how, we really needed to have these conversations. And us knowing each other a little bit, I know that you have a really, really deep background in this, and in a place where, it's under discussed. American agave, California agave, it's something that I think is like a surprise conversation with a lot of industry people. So I think a good place to start is right at the beginning, and what really is California agave. It's Americana. Is it what is it exactly?
So California is defined by California legislature. I can't tell you the exact law, bill, code, whatever they want to call it, but California agave is a protected name that says that you can only use agaves that are grown in California and cannot use additives or coloring to the product. So essentially, you can use any type of agave in California. It's not restricted to U.S. natives, so people are using Mexican varieties as well in their products, and we're not able to use any type of sweeteners, colorings, and whatnot that you might find, down in tequila. So right off the bat, it's additive free. It's local, free range, whatever you want to call us Californians, but. We basically started with a high, benchmark to hit.
Gotcha. How many types of agave are there with how many microclimates in California? There could be a ton of them.
They are everywhere. I mean, if you're in California, have ever been here, I mean, you see agaves everywhere around here, especially like Southern California. Every time I go home to Orange County, it just blows my mind that we grew up and we're always surrounded by so many different types of agave. And the Americana is very, 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 what do I want to say? Like they're well recognized because they're huge. They're also called, loosely the century plant. So, if you saw one, you would know exactly the type of agave we are using. But there are, I would say, dozens of types of agaves being grown here in California, whether commercially or landscaping or any other type of just wild agave out here. And that has been a really fun, it's been a really interesting almost education in that, being able to identify certain agaves here, being able to know their history by, how the Native Americans were using them as food, fibers for clothing, for building materials, for trade, their irrigation and agricultural practices with that. So, once I dipped my toe in, it was just a whole world that I was immersed in and fell in love with.
I imagine. Okay, so in my mind, I'm thinking about harvest, and I'm thinking of like fields of agave you see like in Mexico, and how harvest kind of happens there, where it's pretty systematic. And I get how does harvest for agave in California? Is it as cultivated there? Is it? It sounds like it's a lot more wild. How are those processes different?
It's kind of a mix of both. There are people that have very traditional kind of what you would see in Mexico, lined up, beautiful blue Webers, being, harvested by humidors, very old school. You have guys like us that are literally finding patches of agaves, people's property or other people that we run into or meet. And we have to get creative sometimes. I mean, so a Tequilania, Blue Weber, you're here in California that can grow 90 to 130 pounds on average. So very traditional to how they are in Mexico. But our agave Americanas can get up to 500 pounds per agave. So, they're taking them out of the ground isn't just taking the koa and just, scraping at the roots and topping them over. I mean, we're talking about using winches and logging cables and trucks and excavators and just real machinery. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we've been in places that we've had to, again, be creative because we didn't have the luxury of having the agaves all in a line with all their pups taken off. Sometimes you're going into these agave jungles and having to, pick at the pups to get to the main one. But again, that learning experience is really important because you start learning about, the sugar variations in that, the growing climates that you're in. That's going to translate to obviously your spirit production, but then ultimate flavor at the end. And so, sometimes it would be nice to just have a line of agave ready to harvest, but when you're out there in the field and maybe they just taste that much better because of the labor and love you're putting into it. But we've had to expedite our learning experience because of just the difficult tasks that, are ahead of us.
So you get this 500-pound sucker, right? And you get it out of the ground. Well, like what kind of sugar content can you expect from like one that big? Are those still like pretty juicy? Or the bigger they get, are they like kind of over mature? Like how? I'll let you answer.
No, 100%. So that's like the coolest part about an agave is that it does have a life cycle, right? We're looking at anywhere between 7 to 30 years for agaves up here. Americanas, traditionally, you can get them out 7, maybe 10 years, maybe 15. That number kind of varies. But basically, the agave's whole life, it's basically trying to create energy to eventually grow the big stalk, the quiote, the big, blooming asparagus stalk that you see when it starts growing. right? So its whole life, it's just trying to accumulate all that energy. So eventually when it's time to shoot the stock, it shoots it quick, it shoots it strong. It is a beautiful process to see. And I swear to God, you could almost put your ear to it and hear the stalk, the quiote, grow out of the agave. And so the peak ripeness is right before it wants to, throw the quiote up. And so you're kind of observing that through, looking at a refractometer, getting some juice out of the heart, and seeing kind of where you are in its life cycle. And ideally with agave Americana, you want to be anywhere, in our opinion, anywhere higher than 25 Brix. We've seen them as high as 35. Blue Weber, for example, it can be very traditional to get 30 to 35. We've even seen 45 Brix up here. It's ridiculous. But basically, when you see these 500-pounders, what it's telling me is that it was grown in the right conditions. The pup or rhizome management was great because it's not leaching sugar into its babies, and it has enough sugar to kind of carry itself to grow that big stock. So for us, it is very case by case basis, versus if we had a very nice, manicured field and we knew our planting cycles, we can kind of guesstimate based on environment and all that where we were in that cycle.
The lifespan that we're talking about here, how different is that versus cultivation in Mexico?
It's super similar, but we're actually finding that people are able to harvest in around 5 years. We've seen people harvest agave 5 years, so that would be on average 2 years less than Mexico. We've seen Brix levels be at the same, if not higher than the ones in Mexico. And I think part of this, right, is that, I mean, I have a whole debate with this, but when you see varieties like, let's say, Blue Weber here and Blue Weber there, that's pretty much apples to apples. And what's interesting is that most of the Blue Weber climates in Mexico can be dry and arid, but the rainy seasons are in a different time of the year than they are here in California. In Mexico, and I know this is kind of a generalization, but you're kind of closer to the equator. You have a lot more tropical storms. You have just kind of wetter summers than we do here in California. Most of our water comes throughout the late fall and into the early spring. So the acclimatization that these agaves have are not only different, but I think what is also interesting as well is when you're doing water, we're doing a lot of irrigation as well. And I don't know how much of drip irrigation is being done in Mexico. Not a lot that I see when I travel, but when you're having drip irrigation and able to control that kind of gallons per minute or acre inch of rainfall a year, I think you're able to not only monitor and report on those things, but you're able to enhance its growing cycle. So you might be able to get there faster with more sugar, which sounds like a very American cultivation pioneer, kind of mindset. The other interesting part, though, on the other side is that the native agaves are really interesting because they've been here for many, many generations. They've been here since either the Native Americans were planting them, around and even before them. Some say that the Spaniards were, growing some around their missions throughout here to Texas. That's all super debatable. But anyways, they've been here for a couple hundred years. And so they're well acclimatized to our weather patterns and our kind of temperature swings. And what I've seen is that they're a lot more capable of being dry farmed. And that's been something that I've been trying to do even just on my own homestead at my house, is being able to, plant them certain times of the year that are more favorable for successful transplanting, being able to get the soil amendment right so it can retain just enough water in the hot parts of the summer, but also not retain too much water where agaves don't like a lot of water sitting around. So it's kind of an interesting thing, where if I had my Blue Webers that I have maybe half a dozen at my house who absolutely hate the coldest and hottest parts of the year, versus my Americanas and other native agaves are just totally fine. that's been kind of an interesting observation as well.
That is, and I don't know if we touched on the sugar content difference too with the natives. How much different are they?
Traditionally, the Americanas are lower. Traditionally in Mexico, or like the Oaxaqueña, which is like its cousin, can be used to make pulque. That very traditional Mexican drink. And so a lot of times those agave Americanas, the Salmianas, the Oaxaqueñas, the big agaves will be used to make that, which is traditionally lower in sugar. We see anywhere between 25 and, like I said, the odd, honey holes we see are 35, but we are traditionally just a little lower in sugar compared to like a Blue Weber.
Talking more on like the production side too. So you've gotten these, they're harvested, they're at the sugar content that they're at. How much more do they like vary? Like how many different adjustments do you have to make for fermentation comparatively to like what we see in Mexico agave?
It's a great question. And that's something that I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out, because when you have a consistent number, let's say it's like 30 Brix, that's a really nice kind of starting number. So that way, when you're done with the cooking process and then you are shredding and doing your water addition to, start your mash, basically your wash, you have to know kind of your dilution rates, because that obviously those Brix, not only are they going to convert, that inulin is going to convert into a fermentable sugar in the cooking process, but then you also take that fermentable sugar now from the fiber and you have to dilute it into water to start your fermentation. And so that's, for us, it can be really, almost just freehand when we get there, because what we traditionally do is after the cooking process, we will shred the agave with our shredder. Turns into almost like a sticky hay. It almost looks like a sticky hay. And then we do a really hot soak for a couple of days. So basically, 180 degree water, kind of get it in there and kind of leach the sugar out of the pulp, and ends up in our kind of water solution. And so as long as we're starting somewhere where we know at the other end of the distillation process, almost like you would do a brewing recipe where you want to have your kind of starting gravity in your fermenter at a certain number, we kind of target the same way with starting Brix with our dilutions. And so that can all range, kind of depend on, size of your harvest, the size of your stills, the size of your, just your variables that you have in your equipment. But we try to gauge anywhere between, 10 to 12 Brix starting the fermentation, and so it can ferment cleanly and less risk of getting stuck, which is always fun.
More on that in just a second. I want to have a question on that, but first I want to talk a little bit about fermentation and just like the yeast selection. If you're using just
like a native fermentation.
Yeah, are you using a native fermentation? Are you adding other yeast into the fermentation process?
We're doing a little bit of both, and that was something I wanted to mention too. Is like a lot of the fermentation and kind of like cellar process is a lot more similar to wine than any other type of spirit I've ever made at any facility. And so what's really interesting is like in wine, for instance, some winemakers will start their wines natively, right? Letting native yeast kind of get in there, start, eating up all that good sugar. And then, there's kind of a point where the native yeasts are not strong enough to kind of carry on the entire, fermentation. And so there will be kind of an inoculation of a commercial yeast to kind of take over the fermentation and take it, all the way down. And I've really always liked that process. There's just something really, whether it's the romanticism of it or just the complexity of flavor that I think you get from that, that we've kind of translated into our own process where, sometimes maybe by accident, you start natively, your fermentation just starts ripping on you. And then, you start checking your Brix, and there's kind of a point there where the native yeasts are kind of getting getting tired, and so you throw in an agave, centric yeast that is going to, not only take over the rest of the Brix, and it's the type of fructose glucose that you're wanting to eat, but it's also in that environment could be pretty toxic because there's already a lot of furfural, a lot of fermentation inhibitors just from agave alone, and so I think picking out a specific agave yeast is pretty important if you're going to have a successful harvest. A fermentation. So you don't run into a risk of having, fermentations go less.
It sounds like you have probably used yeast that maybe weren't agave centric and learned the unfun way that might not work.
Yes. And I've also learned that the other, let's say commercial yeasts that are more targeted towards like a rum or just kind of like a standard type of sugar, really doesn't really bring the flavor profile that you're looking for anyway. It's not, in my opinion, targeting the esters and targeting, what you're wanting to get out of the agave versus the other agave centric commercial yeasts are targeting those kind of fruity citric, citrusy esters, that you want out of your spirit at the end.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say we fermented. Do we get down like what kind of alcohol percentage can we usually expect from one of these ferments?
I think if you're targeting anywhere between 10 to 12 Brix, you're hoping that your end ABV is anywhere between 5 to 6% ABV going into your wash still. So very similar to a kind of a mild beer or wort if you're a single malt producer, whiskey. So as long as you have enough there to get into low wines, so you can have a pretty efficient spirit run, you should be good. I think what I have found though is that the conversion of the sugar in the cooking process isn't always perfect. I always find that, as much as I want to get completely dry, I might not get there all the way. So, you're hoping for at least 4 going into the wash still.
I love that. We always, at least 4.
Yeah, like give me 4 and I can work with that. But anything less than that, you're on a razor's edge. And please ask me how I know that.
Oh yeah, we've all learned, unfortunately, the hard way sometimes. So let's kind of dive into distillation technique. I imagine that you're at least doing 2 distillations.
Yes. So we're doing a standard stripping run and then your spirit run. Again, it can be really not volatility as far as like what's inside the still, but it just feels like a roller coaster ride because agave distillation to me is slightly different than maybe a traditional like whiskey or brandy or any type of gin. It's actually kind of closer to brandy if you ask me. Making that spirit in the spirit run. Personally, having a deflag there really helps because just being able to get more reflux into the spirit distillation just allows you to have not just more control of a spirit, just like what the deflag allows you to do, but it also allows us to get deeper into the kind of heart tails side of the distillations. And I believe that's where a lot of the complexity and flavor comes in. There's some traditional like mescaleros that even just do one distillation, but they go all the way through, and brings the complexity. And then other traditional mezcals are using the tails to cut back, the hearts to drinking strength, right? So there's a lot of ways of doing it. For us, what we try to do is get a really good hearts cut, know that that's guaranteed to be good ethanol, and then the tails to me is really the magic, and we try to go as far as we can without it tasting too skunky. But I think what's really beautiful there is as you almost get a second batch in your good tails, we call them, and then there we'll try to blend it back into the hearts, as much as we can, and sometimes we'll blend all of it back in, and it just creates, I think, in my opinion, just a really complex flavor that doesn't necessarily need to be aged, but rested for a little bit and get a flavor profile that I think is just absolutely delicious.
Yeah, I think what I find really interesting about, and you mentioned this just barely, how similar brandy and agave can be, especially when it comes to methanol.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's been a big part of it as well. Just because, I mean, methanol is really found right in the kind of the, what do you call it? The, not the vegetable part, but the the organic matter of grapes, and then also agave is really high in methanol as well. So that would be something to watch out for.
Yeah, and just obviously we all know how difficult methanol can be to remove from a distillation, and there is that kind of similar. With brandy, there's only so much that you can remove. There will be some that comes along, and depending on your rules and regulations, it might be more than what is technically allowed. But it's what is possible, and it's also not harmful to the consumer. Right? It should point out.
Absolutely, and that's something that they're very strict on in Mexico with the CRT and their governing bodies. I know that they have certain thresholds that you have to meet to be a valid product. We also have to adhere by the TTB and ABC, FDA, and all the rules up here. But I think what's been really great is being able to adapt a lot of those processes you see in Mexico and translate them to an American craft distillery, where that's been kind of the fun part about the whole production process.
Totally. Okay. And so you got your product. You've combined as much hearts and tails as you can, and you mentioned rusting. So let's talk a little bit about rusting and any aging as well. Now, how the spirit reacts to that.
Yeah, I think with us, we try to keep it everything like a Blanco or Joven, depending on what nomenclature you want to use. We just believe that, well, like a lot of spirits, they just need a little time to rest before you go into bottle or after proofing, just to give it some air and just a rest. And so we try to rest it in stainless for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks before we go into bottle. But then, like when we go into bottle, it's really interesting too. Again, it's almost like wine, where you open a bottle of agave spirit, and sometimes I leave it open for a couple hours, let it air out before I have a sip. And it really does open up in ways that I haven't found in any other type of spirit.
I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. Like, have you been able to know like what is the change that's occurred? Like what it has improved?
Nothing that I would sound intelligent on your podcast, Molly, but I think
I
there
just
is
feel.
there is a certain change. I can't remember who I was talking to, but there was someone that kind of gave me an answer. And it was kind of a chemical change. And I can't remember what exactly the science was behind it, but it was something where I thought, man, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only person that's ever tried to figure this out. And I wish I were to maybe write down what that person said, but I know for a fact that there is something happening when the spirit is interacting with air. And I don't think it's necessarily like an oxidization, like a wine where that oxygen is kind of slowly turning that wine into vinegar. I think it might be, some other conversion of another organic part of its chemistry that is, either changing the esters or phenolics or something in the spirit, because it does change. It does become more complex the more it is exposed to air.
I am thinking of someone to ask this question to you. But I don't think this podcast is kind of like a phone a friend thing.
I
Maybe
wish.
some. Okay, and did you mention aging?
Aging for us as of right now, the style of product that we're making, we don't do any aging or any oak kind of aging as of right now, because we're kind of more on the earthen pit mezcal-esque type of process. We just don't really think we need oak or any kind of aging to soften or give the spirit, an addition to its flavor profile. I mean, I think it would be a really interesting journey to go through barrel aging, especially being here in Napa, having so many different types of barrel profiles, new, used, wine, different finishes that I think would be really interesting to the category. But until I'm able to cook the agaves cleanly through stainless, whether it's like a autoclave, pressure cooker, mash cooker kind of situation, make a cleaner spirit, and I mean cleaner just by not smoky or cooked in an earthen pit. That would be an interesting addition to see if you can get the same qualities through a barrel without any additives as you would what you're seeing down in Mexico.
Oh, very interesting. I mean, yeah, very interesting. So kind of just in this kind of production style, right? And how it changes, how it's different from tequila. What's been like the biggest production surprise that you've kind of come from? That's something that was totally unexpected.
Honestly, I can say that just how laborious the whole process is. It just reminds me to my time in winemaking of how many processes there are to the fermentation and how I guess rudimentary like we get in the process. I mean, we are literally, taking agaves, hand harvesting them. We are cooking them in an earthen pit. So that means you have to, get the pit ready, build the pit, get the fire going, get the agaves cooking. You tarp them up. That can be a variable there. You take them out, you ferment, you shred them, do the fermentation process, you finish the fermentation, you press off the fibers like you would in a fruit basket, wine basket, or grape basket like we use in wine, and then I finally get to distill. So the thing that surprised me was just how many not just variables there are that you can manipulate throughout the process, but just how much labor it takes to make a spirit like this when you're doing it the way that we are. And still, I mean, making tequila is no easy task either. I just something that like when you're just so used to getting a sack of grain or a toted GNS off a truck or getting wine from a winery, it all feels like it's just so engineered to be perfect and efficient and jam packed full of everything you need, versus these agaves are just so wild and needing so much love along the way, just like a grape does, I think.
I can't imagine the labor. And we've all like done laborious things, but I'm all the extra steps that you have mentioned, and the sheer like getting a 500-pound sucker out of the earth and trying to work with it and maneuver it and keep it usable like that's there's a whole skill that I don't think we even touched in, like just literally keeping that safe for transport, I'm sure was a task.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just trying to figure out how to have one of those things, I mean, you see the guys in Mexico with the blue Ebers and they just take their koa, split it in half, or they take an axe, there you go, right? It's like chopping wood. I mean, but when this thing is almost as tall as you are and your axe is covering such a small portion of the surface area that you're trying to cut into, it's been just a process. Like, again, like we're just really trying to not just perfect the process we are here, but taking notes to eventually maybe have some sort of mechanical harvesting implementation that would help with the entire process. Because I mean, we feel every single pound of those 2 tons of those agaves that we do per batch, and so I think when we're kind of looking at this, it's a lot of proof of concept, and so hopefully we can figure that out. But in the meantime, yeah, we're relying a lot on hands and excavators and buckets and trucks and all that to make it happen. There's no donkey that we can rely on to carry one of those down the hill.
Not yeah, but maybe maybe soon, right?
Yeah, never say never, right?
Yeah, you can take one home with you. Well, that's not um so you know people are pretty familiar with tequila and mezcal and the flavors that we get from those. How do you think that the California agave differs in its flavor profile?
I think it's very, I wouldn't even say adjacent, because there are agave Americana mezcals out there that I've had that are quite delicious. I think what's really been the biggest compliment is having our agave spirit in a mezcal lineup and people not calling it out for not being not, in the same style or quality. So that's been really like our highest compliment so far. But I think what the biggest difference is just, to me, it's just the variety of agave that we're using. The agave Americana, I think, just has so many beautiful notes that I personally really find interesting, because your traditional Blue Webers can be peppery, citrusy, nice spice, vegetal notes, highest qualities. You can almost taste the roast on the agave after the cook, very, very transparent, very, very, very good notes in those spirits. And I think with the agave Americana, like, the body is so full, it feels so rich, and that might be something because of how much of the tails we're cutting into. It's citrusy, but it's like orange juice, it's spicy and it's peppery, but it's like chomping on a jalapeno. It's just so, I think, just not extracted or exaggerated, but it's just such a strong flavor profile mixed in with a little bit of that smoke, and that I think it's just really complements a lot of like how I appreciate like Salmiana mezcals or Oaxacensis mezcals from Oaxaca. That it's fun. I'm an avid mezcal drinker. I've been just having a lot of fun with different types of mezcals and destilados de agave and all that fun stuff. So I think being able to be unique but still in the same quality and family as Mexican agave spirit has been the best.
I think it sounds wonderful. Like I very much want to try it. And I'm curious if you are thinking of any other like products to make with this agave.
Yeah, I am. I mean, that's the best part about this, is that in the next couple of years, the California agave just community has just exploded over the last couple of years, and I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to find an abundance of agaves here available to use, and so that'll be interesting, having other craft distillers hopefully working with the materials, seeing if they can find a way to work with it efficiently and get the right sugars and still efficiencies that they're looking for comparatively to other products that they're making, but as well as what other types of spirits can we be making, or what other products can we be making with these agave spirits. And so whether that's, cooking them down and making our own type of agave syrups for RTDs or cocktail mixers. If you're going to be able to use parts of the agaves to, steep and make, aromatic types of maybe bitters, who knows? I mean, the cool thing about, I think, California right now is like we're just the Wild West, almost like how American single malt has been in the last 10 years, of people using different oak profiles, using different types of malted profiles from Pilsner all the way to Munichs and chocolates. I think agave here in California is going to be used the same. People are going to be using different types of agaves in different ways. Are they going to cook them cleanly? Are they going to do an earthen pit? Are they going to find a different process of cooking it that hasn't been used neither here or in Mexico or in the world? And that's going to be a beautiful thing. As long as the quality is there, I'm really excited to see what people are going to come up with.
If you had like one, like non agave spirit, but one agave product that you could release, like your little dream product, what would it be?
Well, thankfully, I'm already there, Molly, so I don't even know what we're talking about. But I think if I was going to have a lot of fun with it, I feel like I would really find it interesting to do a lot of RTDs. I think that's such an interesting category to me, how that is all kind of exploded, how you can literally just buy a beautiful cocktail in a can and just have that at home, have that at a bar, have that on a golf course, have that, gosh, anywhere now. I've just been finding so much love, for those types of products when they're done well. And I think well to me is being able to use a lot of different, or the same spirit in many ways, or being able to cut it with, other natural, really pretty flavors. I don't know. I can just see myself, trying a Cadillac margarita somehow, in a can somewhere, maybe on a hiking trip or camping or something, because you use the agave spirit, but then you use some of that agave spirit and maybe, with some citrus to make a triple sec. Maybe you render down the juice to make a syrup so you can use that as your sweetener, fresh lime juice. I mean, just sounds delicious. And so I think there's hopefully going to be just a variation of different products coming through that isn't just trying to mimic tequila or mezcal, that maybe there's certain liqueurs that we're able to use with other really cool California products like citrus or nuts or something that could be, maybe not a staple, but, could become popular among the mixology kind of distiller nerds.
I just love that the RTD you mentioned is like it's agave on agave on agave.
Exactly, right? I mean, how disappointed do you get when you're drinking like what you perceive to be a cocktail and it's just a sugar wash? You're like, oh man, that's really disappointing. There's not even a spirit in here. And so there's probably so many different variables there with business and just all the numbers, and that probably doesn't make any sense. But I think right now, the industry's just begging for people to get creative and people to start taking some chances, so we can start kind of expanding our horizons, but also introducing new players to the game that might be able to take those chances that maybe the big portfolios just don't feel like taking right now.
Yeah, and I think that is a great place to stop. For more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter featuring new stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. Gian, if people want to learn more or taste for themselves some of the results of the projects you've worked on, how can they dig a little deeper?
Well, you can follow Jano Spirits. You can check out our website, janospirits.com. Our Instagram is Jano Spirits. You can check me out on Instagram at El Jano Blanco. And to see where they currently are selling Jano. I think we're on batch 2, working on batch 3 this year. And then hopefully the products at the Ruins Distillery will be out sometime in the near future.
Awesome. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
You got it.
This podcast has been brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.